CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Naweed Jabarkil. Our top stories this hour. The warnings mount. More countries tell their citizens to get out of Ukraine as the US says a Russian invasion could happen at any moment. Protesters take to the streets of Kiev in a show of solidarity against Russia. Drive for change. Thousands of vehicles converge on Paris to protest against COVID restrictions. And skating into the history books. China's Gao Qingyu shatters an Olympic speed skating record, winning the host country a fourth gold medal. The US has warned Russia of a resolute, massive and united transatlantic response if it invades Ukraine in a call between the country's foreign ministers. It comes as Washington ordered the majority of its embassy staff in Kiev and some 150 military trainers to leave the country, with other Western nations following suit. Meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron spoke to his Russian counterparts for almost 2 hours on Saturday, while US President Joe Biden is set to talk to Vladimir Putin in the coming hours. Michael Voss has the latest on the crisis.
Large-scale Russian military exercises in Belarus are now in full swing, with an estimated 130,000 troops poised along long stretches of the Ukraine border. The Russian Navy is also holding exercises off Crimea, which the Kremlin seized from Ukraine 8 years ago. These live exercises are one of the reasons the US has warned that an invasion could be imminent.
We continue to see very troubling signs of Russian escalation, including new forces arriving around Ukraine's borders. As I said yesterday, we're in the window when a Russian invasion could start at any time if President Putin so decides. That includes in the coming days.
Both the US and Russia are pulling some of their diplomats out of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, while Britain and several other nations have followed the US lead, asking their citizens in Ukraine to leave, warning that UK forces will not step in to evacuate anyone if there is a war.
There will be a big difference between what they may have seen on their TV screens in Afghanistan over the summer and what may happen over the next week or so, and that is that the Royal Air Force will not be in a position to go in and to fly people out. So they need to leave now by commercial means or drive out of Ukraine into a neighbouring country, and they should do that immediately.
Britain is also pulling its troops that were training the Ukrainian army out of the country, and along with NATO has stressed that no troops will be based in Ukraine to help counter a Russian invasion. But the NATO build-up in Eastern Europe is gathering steam. The US has deployed 2nd Cavalry Regiment troops from Germany to Romania, along with Black Hawk helicopters, while an additional 3,000 US paratroops from its elite 82nd Airborne Division are due in Poland shortly. The government in Ukraine is urging its citizens to remain calm and avoid actions that undermine stability or sow panic. At the same time, it said its armed forces are ready to repel anyone. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says there are no plans to invade Ukraine, but wants its security concerns addressed.
As far as further negotiations with our European and American partners, they are continuing in the open, as well as behind closed doors. We are preparing a response for NATO and for Washington.
The two sides are still far apart on Russia's demand that Ukraine never be permitted to join NATO and that the US withdraw its missiles from Eastern Europe. But high-level talks are still underway in a bid to de-escalate the crisis. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Let's take you live to Kiev now, and our reporter Peter Dickinson, who's there. Peter, the high-stakes diplomacy continuing then with that lengthy call between Presidents Putin and Macron, and the one coming up with Joe Biden as well. What's the latest on the ground, and what's the Ukrainian government's been saying about all this?
Well, the conversation between French President Emmanuel Macron and Vladimir Putin is encouraging, if not for any other reason, merely for the fact that it lasted almost 2 hours. So talks continue, but of course all eyes are on the conversation with US President Joe Biden, which is recognized by Russia and by Ukraine certainly as the key relationship in this crisis. The readouts after that call will be very closely scrutinized to see of any sign that there may be movement towards a breakthrough. At this stage, there doesn't appear to be so, but at least from a Kiev point of view, from a Ukrainian point of view at least, it is welcome to see a resolute position from the Western leaders. No sign yet of any great breaks in the Western alliance, and a sense of unity in support of Ukraine and solidarity with Ukraine. We have, of course, seen on the other side of this coin that the Western embassies have begun to pull their staff out of Kiev in the last 24 hours. America had done so a number of weeks ago already, but now we've seen a number of European countries, and Israel as well, reportedly are removing many of their diplomats, amid calls also from the British government for their British nationals to leave Ukraine immediately, given the impending threat. So the situation remains extremely tense, and the Ukrainian government finds itself in a challenging position. On the one hand, maintaining international solidarity and communicating the scale of the threat facing the country, but on the other hand, preventing panic. Ukraine has been very clear since the crisis began that this is actually a weapon in a hybrid war against Ukraine, that one of Russia's goals is to destabilize the country and impose economic costs and perhaps destabilize the entire social fabric in the country. President Zelensky, Ukraine's leader, spoke about this earlier today.
I have to speak with our people like like a president, and say people truth, and the truth that we have different information. And now the best friend for enemies, that is panic in our country. And all this information that helps only for panic doesn't help us.
And is that message getting through to people on the ground? What's it like there, Peter? An anti-war rally also taking place in Kiev today.
Well, I think there is very little evidence of panic in Ukraine. Obviously, the conflict, the threat of a major escalation is at the forefront of everybody's minds. People are taking precautions. People are looking to make sure that they have perhaps plans to move to different parts of the country or even to leave Ukraine if that is an option for them or if that becomes a necessity. People are making sure they have supplies at home. But life does continue as normal. Business continues as normal. The restaurants in Kiev are full. The mood is very stoical. And it's also important to bear in mind that Ukrainians have lived with the threat of a major escalation for 8 years now, since the seizure of Crimea in 2014. Russia and Ukraine have been engaged in an undeclared war, and the threat of a major escalation of a Russian offensive targeting areas out of the country beyond East Ukraine, which has been under de facto Russian occupation since 2014, has remained a constant. So people have been living with this for a while. Of course, they're aware that we're currently living through a particularly intense period of threat. The dangers are apparent, but at the same time, there's a certain amount of determination, a certain amount of defiance, and a mood that Ukrainians are saying, well, yes, we will stand.
Thanks for that, Peter. Peter Dickinson for us live in Kiev. Police in Paris have fired tear gas on protesters on the Champs-Élysées. Authorities had earlier stopped hundreds of vehicles from entering the city to join a protest against COVID restrictions. Motorists have been converging on the French capital from cities across the country. The demonstrations have been inspired by the so-called Freedom Convoy protests led by Canadian truckers. Ryan Thompson was at the protest and joins us from the French capital now. Ryan, good to see you. What's the latest there on the ground then?
Hi there, Nui. Well, these protests are very much continuing. It's a bit of a game of cat and mouse up and down the Champs-Élysées, Paris's iconic avenue, We were there a little bit earlier, dead in the middle, and protesters were really trying to egg on the police. They were parked there, they had their cars parked, similar to those what we've seen in Canada, and they had tear gas fired at them by police, because police really enforcing this is obviously not allowed, keep the traffic moving. But despite police's best efforts to keep this protest out of Paris with those road checks and controls on the edge of the city and the ring road this morning, there have been hundreds and hundreds of protesters, hundreds of cars that have made their way into the heart of the city and are protesting in line and in solidarity with this idea of the Liberty Convoy. It's been a pretty messy situation, but it also is largely under control. Lots of tear gas filed. According to police, there have been only about a dozen or so arrests, but there have been hundreds of people who have been ticketed because, according to them, this protest has been banned, and so taking part in it is grounds for any kind of write-up.
And Ryan, some of the inspiration for this appears to be what's happening in Canada and the vaccine mandates, resisting that. But are these protests just about COVID restrictions?
Yeah, well, there's definitely a degree of solidarity with those protests in Canada. I can tell you that when we were on the ground, we actually saw a handful of protesters who had Canadian flags with them. They themselves were not Canadian, but that is, of course, where they are getting the inspiration for this movement. The protests have really been a mix of different groups, different ideologies across the French political spectrum who have converged here at the same time to send a message to the government and to the world. Of course, a large portion of them are against France's COVID protocols, the fact that there is a vaccine pass that is required to access many places like restaurants, cafes, or coffee shops. But then you also see remnants of the Gilets jaunes, yellow vest protests from before the pandemic. We've seen a handful of protesters, actually a couple dozens of them, wearing those iconic yellow vests that we saw so much during those protests in 2019. Overall, all of these people have a message for the government that they are just not happy with the way things are right now. Even though there were reforms, and in regards to COVID rules, they are easing in the next couple of weeks, it's not good enough for them. They want their liberty back. That is their message. And speaking with them, I can tell you that, as a reminder, we are only a few weeks or months out from the French election in April, and many of these people say they are not going to vote for Macron again, the French president, but they are excited that they will have the chance to put a new candidate in the Élysée Palace.
Yeah, perhaps another wake-up call for Emmanuel Macron. Ryan Thompson for us live in Paris. Thank you. On now to that story in Canada and the so-called Freedom Convoy protests. Police have started to clear a blockade of the main crossing between the US-Canada border. It comes after a court ordered demonstrators to leave the bridge. Truckers, angered by a COVID vaccine mandate, have blocked the road since Monday. Ontario province has declared a state of emergency. Thousands of people have been protesting in the Australian capital against vaccine mandates. Demonstrators marched on Parliament House in Canberra, blocking streets and roads around the capital. Australia's Prime Minister says he understands concerns about vaccine mandates and that they've been issued unilaterally by state governments. 94% of Australians are double vaccinated. In the UK, Downing Street has confirmed that Boris Johnson has received a questionnaire from police investigating lockdown parties at the Prime Minister's office, which also serves as his residence. UK police are questioning 50 people to ask about the series of gatherings in a scandal that's plagued Johnson and threatened his leadership for weeks. Downing Street said the Prime Minister would respond as required. Hong Kong has reported a record number of COVID cases. Over 1,500 people tested positive on Saturday, and 3 people died of the virus. The city's medical authorities are calling the outbreak the toughest battle against the disease in 2 years. Still ahead here on CGTN. Swapping COVID masks for Venetian masks. The centuries-old carnival gets underway in the floating city.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center, a modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens, and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter, on CGTN. See the difference.
This week on Razor, a potential cure for premature aging. And farming the vertical way.
We've automated pretty much every component, so we've got robots on each side where energy is required to obviously move crops, and then we've got this almost like roller coaster type system for effectively sorting out crops, harvesting and cleaning.
Welcome back. A bit of breaking news to start off with around this story in Ukraine. We understand the US President Joe Biden has now begun a telephone conversation with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. That comes hours after Mr. Putin spoke for almost 2 hours with France's President Emmanuel Macron. Now, just a reminder, on Friday, the US told its citizens to leave Ukraine and said that any who remained in the country would not be able to receive help in terms of evacuations. That was a message repeated by some of its key allies, including the UK, Australia and the Netherlands. And this comes amid fresh US intelligence warnings that an attack or an invasion into Ukraine by Russia could be imminent. We heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying it could happen within the next few days. Now, the National Security Advisor of the US, Jake Sullivan, in his press conference, he spoke about the buildup of Russian troops as a precursor to that and military drills planned as well, although Russia has insisted throughout that it has no plans to invade Ukraine and says it's just resisting NATO aggression. Well, we will have more on that story on CGTN as soon as we get it for you. The US has confirmed plans to reopen an embassy in the Solomon Islands after closing it 29 years ago. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made the announcement after meeting 18 Asia-Pacific leaders during a visit to Fiji. The move's widely seen as the latest effort by the US to counter China's influence in the region. The Taliban regime in Afghanistan has accused President Joe Biden of theft after he signed an executive order splitting the country's frozen assets in the US. $7 billion out of more than 9 held internationally will be divided between humanitarian aid for Afghanistan and a fund for the victims of the 9/11 terror attacks on New York and Washington. It's understood the US will send $3.5 billion to help meet humanitarian needs without benefiting the Taliban. Brazil has recorded the most deforestation ever in the Amazon rainforest for the month of January. 430 square kilometers of trees were cut down. That's more than 7 times the size of New York's Manhattan. Environmentalists accuse Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro of allowing deforestation to accelerate. Italy's Venice Carnival has kicked off, but without the popular parades due to COVID-19 restrictions. The festival, famous for its elaborate masks, dates back all the way to the 12th century, and it's one of the most well-known annual carnivals in the world. Well, Hermione Kitson is in Venice for us. Hi, Hermione. What's the atmosphere like there, then?
Well, it's a wonderful atmosphere here in Venice with Venetians and visitors parading the streets in elaborate costumes and masks. This is one of the world's oldest festivals, and it is an important opportunity for the floating city to demonstrate its artisan work and the traditions that it has become so famous for. Today is the first day of the carnival. It will run for 2 weeks, and during that time there will be parades and boat races, exhibitions, and of course the very exclusive masquerade evening balls. But due to regulations for COVID regulations, it will be a hybrid event, so there will be some physical events, but also most of them online. So those big physical events that usually take place in San Marco Square, like the Angel Flight, won't actually be happening this year, and numbers are definitely down in comparison to pre-pandemic levels. But a lot of tourists who I spoke with today say despite this reduced format, it is a very special event regardless.
It's wonderful, wonderful. We're so glad that it's opening up and we can enjoy a little bit of the area while we're here, and it's wonderful.
Compared to 2 years ago, I would say so. We're moving in the right direction.
Awesome to see many people enjoying the carnival, and because of the vaccination, I think it's quite safe to enjoy the festival too.
So 2 years ago, the Venice Carnival was actually the first international event that was shut down due to the pandemic. This year, it's gradual reopening, and also this year's theme, Remember the Future, is an important signal that perhaps Venice and Italy really is on the road to recovery.
And Hermione, you mentioned the impact of COVID there. The rules have just changed in Italy. What impact will that have?
Well, yes, this is what's been so difficult for organisers in the weeks leading into the carnival, because there's been so much uncertainty. So just yesterday, the rules changed, and outside it's no longer obligatory to wear a mask. And also this weekend, nightclubs are allowed to reopen after 2 years, but maximum capacity is at 50%. So that will affect some events during the carnival, of course. So this year it's really considered a bridge event between the pre and post-pandemic times, but still an important step in the right direction.
Okay, well, have a good time. Hermione Kitson for us live in Venice. It was a history-making day at the Beijing Winter Games. China's Gao Tingyu broke the Olympic record in the men's 500-meter speed skating with a time of 34.32 seconds. It was China's first ever gold in the event and the host nation's fourth gold medal of the Beijing Olympics. South Korea took silver in the event and Japan claimed bronze. And the oldest competitors in Saturday's mixed team snowboard cross event beat out their younger rivals to take gold. In a nail-biting race, American Lindsay Jacob-Ellis and teammates Nick Baumgartner edged out Italian medalist Michela Moioli at the last moment, winning by a narrow 0.2 seconds. It was Jacob-Ellis's second gold for Team USA at the Beijing Games. Staying with the Beijing Games, and the Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago is taking part in the Winter Olympics for the first time in 2 decades with a 2-man team. Axel Brown will compete in bobsleigh with Andre Marcano. He told CGTN the team was only created about 6 months ago.
Though I've been competing for 8 years, this is my 8th season, the team is brand new, and Trinidad and Tobago hasn't been represented at a Winter Olympics for 20 years. So that in itself is pretty special, and I'm happy to be the one kind of spearheading that.
How do you see the long history of track and field in Trinidad and Tobago can utilize being in bobsled?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of our game is speed. It always is. Everything that we're doing is trying to get that sled moving as fast as we possibly can. So I know my skill set is in being a larger athlete. I'm very powerful, but I lack the top-end speed. We know that in Trinidad and Tobago, we've got a wealth of very fast athletes. We've got a steeped history of Olympic success in track and field. So we have a lot of athletes with that elite level speed that I'm lacking that can complement me on the team and hopefully mean that we can progress over the next few years and become a real challenger on the world stage, not just a presence, but actually a challenger and be competing for medals.
Well, the Beijing Games have also given rise to an unexpected star whose likeness has been flying off shop shelves. Products featuring the now famous mascot Bing Duen Duen, there he is, are selling out across China. Long queues have been forming wherever stock is still available, with customers hoping to get their hands on the panda. CGTN's correspondent B. Rand speaks with the mascot's designer.
I wasn't the only one surprised. The whole design team didn't expect Bing Duen Duen to be this popular. We gave all of the stock to friends and family members before the Olympic opening ceremony, as we thought nobody would buy it once the games started. Now you see, it's sold out. But don't worry, production is ramping up. Every fan can get one very soon.
Why do you think people like Bing Duen Duen that much?
This is a good question. It's become a phenomenon, meaning it's more than just a mascot now. People are queuing for hours to buy Bing Duen Duen. But why? I think we can all feel the warmth brought by the cute panda. When people hold a Bing Duen Duen, they can feel joy. My team and I are very touched and grateful that people love the little panda.
Could you tell us more about the concepts behind the design of Bing Duen Duen?
Good design is not always about taking away but adding. We need to make sure all the indispensable elements are in harmony without weakening the design. We hit a bottleneck before we added the colourful ribbon around Bing Duen Duen's face. It's very challenging when you know something is missing but you don't know what to add. When adjusting the design on the computer and we moved the colourful halo towards the panda's face for the first time, I knew that was it. Bing Duanduan's image was complete. The design of the mascot is rooted in traditional Chinese culture and artistic philosophies. Its aesthetic is black against white, fluffy against a hard suit, cold against warm. The uniqueness of Bing Duanduan wins its commercial value, which in turn can lead to more creative designs in China.
Now, the old joke, bring me a crocodile steak and make it snappy, is now a reality in Thailand. People there have started eating the gnarly reptiles as the price of more traditional meat soars. Martin Lowe has been sinking his teeth into the story.
You wouldn't call them beautiful, and they're certainly not cuddly, but apparently they taste just fine. Crocodile meat is making its way onto menus at restaurants across Thailand after a surge in the price of pork. It seems steaks, burgers and stir-fries can all be made with the flesh of the monster-like creatures. Crocs are bred at farms across Thailand, but previously it was their leathery skins that were sought after for bags and belts. Any meat was sold for export. But a shortage of pork caused by disease in pigs has seen this ingredient, essential in many Thai dishes, replaced by crocodile.
Word is getting around that crocodile is tasty. At first, people didn't think of it as food. They just felt scared of crocodiles. But when they taste it, they like it and come back for more.
Elsewhere, the pork shortage has also seen an increase in people eating rats. Field rats, said to be not dirty like their city cousins, have always been eaten in northeastern Thailand. Now the practice is spreading. I love crocodile and it saves my dad money, says this girl. But he won't eat it, only me. Well, the proof of the pudding, or in this case the crocodile, is of course in the eating. It's good. It's a little bit chewy, but it just tastes like meat. It said any dish that can be made with pork or chicken can be made with crocodile.
It's not different. It's the same as chicken. It's delicious.
Tastes good. I like it.
We'll have to wait and see if croc remains a permanent addition to Thai cuisine once pork is once again freely available. Martin Lowe, CGTN, Ratchaburi, Thailand.
A reminder of our headlines. US President Joe Biden is currently speaking with Russia's President Vladimir Putin as tensions mount over Ukraine. More countries have told their citizens to leave the country as the US says a Russian invasion could happen at any moment. And drive for change. Hundreds of vehicles converge on Paris to protest against COVID-19 restrictions. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. Coming up next, it's The Agenda. For now, though, from all the team here in London, goodbye.